Hi everybody, I'm back with another video of records from my local favorite record store called Aerozame Records here in Gainesville, Florida. They just recently had their 5th anniversary, 5 years open, and I had actually requested the time off. The day of the sale was a Saturday, and I normally work Saturdays, and coming up on the end of the year I had some vacation time to use up, so I actually requested that day off to make it to the sale. Unfortunately, I'd spent a lot of money recently between the Friends of the Library sale and more importantly at a local kind of a big box retailer, buying a lot of used CDs. Had some really cool collections of CDs come in, and I spent probably 150 to 200 bucks, somewhere in that range on CDs. Still been picking up a few more here and there. So I only brought, I think, $50 to this sale. Didn't want to spend a lot of money, but I'd already taken the day off and decided I'd go in and check it out. Had some pretty cool deals. Everything in the store, all records were 20% off. $3 records, there's quite a few $3 records. They were buy one get one free, and all the records in the dollar bin were 4 for $1. So pretty cool deals. Figured I'd kind of go in and do it on the cheap. First of all, from the $3 selections, I like to try to take advantage of the deals, so I picked up I think 6 $3 records. A couple which I kind of took a chance on. I wasn't sure if I already had or didn't. Turns out I did, but these are probably upgrades quality wise. First up, the original album from prog rock band UK with Alan Holdsworth, John Wetton, Eddie Jobson on violin and keyboards, and Bill Bruford on drums. You know, $3. I think this is a Polydor pressing. Can't go wrong for $3. Buy one get one, so it's $1.50. And then their second album, Danger Money. And this one, I can see the Polydor logo on the back. Really nice shape. Can't go wrong. $1.50 a piece on those, even if I already have them. If I have them and they're not upgrades, I'll just send them off as VCLT, I guess. Next up, a lot of people are familiar with this guy, the guitarist, second guitarist of Yes, actually third guitarist. Peter Banks, then Steve Howe, and then Trevor Rabin. This was his second, I believe, solo album. I already had his third, Wolf, in my collection, but saw this one for $3 and figured I'd pick it up. I already kind of heard this one and it didn't really grab me, but for $3 I figured I'd give it a chance. It's better than I remember. Sometimes I found out you listen to stuff online or download a CD and you listen to something, it doesn't quite grab you, but when you play it on vinyl you kind of get more absorbed into it and you enjoy it more. He always had a knack for writing good hooks, good melodies, things like that, and you could definitely hear his progression as a songwriter. So yeah, pretty cool for $3, so $1.50 on that. When it works out, some jazz for $3, can't go wrong. A Prestige record, the Prestige label. Richard Groove Holmes, recorded live at Count Basie's. This one called Living Soul. In pretty good shape. Prestige, I think this might be a first pressing, but on the it's kind of a later album, so on the blue label with the silver trident. Next up, kind of more electronic, experimental type stuff. Pretty cool finds, I thought, for $3, 2 for $3. First up, the split LP, split, I guess EP really. One side is The Bug versus The Rootsmen, featuring Daddy Freddy, and the other side, DJ Rupture. The Bug is a guy named Kevin Martin, British musician. A lot of different weird, kind of heavy, industrial type electronic. This is kind of a mix of hardcore industrial with reggae. I don't know, it's hard to explain. Pretty heavy stuff.
Road. Road. Going in and I'm in a war. It's sword. 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 Shot in a face like dart in a board. Read. 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 Do it like you bumble and scream. 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 Who can hear them? Who might go feel? Or say what you know me. Sing on the road and rolling. Like say you're feeling on the rolling. Me and the machine ready for them. Ready for them. When the big dog rolling. You don't want it when one shot start. People will be like
I really wish I could find more stuff by The Bug, by Kevin Martin. More of his recent stuff, but it's just doesn't really show up in the US as far as I've seen. I mean, I could find it online, but I like finding stuff in the wild. So this is pretty cool to find it in the wild. This one on, what label is this? That's a good question. I think this one's on more of a major label, so not quite so hard to find. On the Tiger Beat 6 label. That's a little bit easier to find than a lot of his other stuff, which is more of a smaller press. And then next up, actually I already had this record, but it kind of means a lot to me. I fell in love with these guys and their weird style of music back in the late 90s, and this is one of their first records, and it's kind of a documentation of their let's see, they competed at the DMC Disco Music Club or Disco Music Championships. I can't remember what DMC stands for, but it's like kind of the competition for the best DJs. And I think this was their winning routine. This is Invisible Scratch Pickles versus the Clams of Death. So you've got Mixmaster Mike, who would later go on to be part of the Beastie Boys. Shortcut, he was kind of the beat juggler, drummer of the group. And where is he? There he is, DJ Qbert. Qbert's kind of the Jimi Hendrix of the turntablist world. Weird, you know, come up with all kinds of weird scratching techniques, record and turntable and you know, fader manipulation techniques. Really cool stuff. Yeah, this is really cool. Like I said, I already had a copy of this. It's not super hard to find, but yeah, really neat. And lovely photo on the B side. One side is, I guess, the clean side, clean version. The other side's got the swearing and the ladies with their titties out. So pretty cool. Yeah, if you're into turntablist music, if you know what that is, this is kind of an essential record, I think, to own. And then next up, a record by one of the bands of heavy metal bassist Neil Murray, from Whitesnake. This is National Health. And there's also Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics in this. Pretty weak as far as heavy metal goes. A lot of tiddly diddly type stuff. Didn't really do it for me. Okay, of course I'm kidding. These are a great Canterbury type band here. Neil Murray just happened to play bass on this between Coliseum 2 with John Heisman, I think was his name, and Gary Moore on guitar. Don Airy, I think, was on keyboards. In between that and his stint with Whitesnake and other of the top echelon of British hard rock and heavy metal bands. He just happened to play on National Health for some reason. And of course it's not this Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics, it's Dave Stewart from Egg and oh boy, all the great Canterbury type bands. Dave Stewart was kind of the man. Pit Pile on drums, Phil Miller on guitar. I think he just recently passed away, unfortunately. Amanda Parsons on vocals. Yeah, just, you know, one of the classic Canterbury scene, sort of, I don't know. There's progressive rock and then there's Canterbury. Canterbury's maybe a little more intellectual, a little more folksy. I don't know. I'm not so much in the genres, but I like all the Canterbury type stuff. National Health, Egg, Gong, Steve Hillage, all that kind of good stuff. So definitely a cool find for $8. And then scraping through the dollar bin, since the records were 4 for $1, figured I'd go through those. It seemed like everything in the dollar bin I'd seen from previous visits, and did pick up one that I'd kind of passed on before. I'm not sure why I passed on it. Maybe just because it's kind of more of an easy listening album, but this is Nelson Riddle, Sea of Dreams. If you know jazz, you're probably familiar with his work. Worked with a lot of different jazz musicians, arranging and orchestrating, but this is just kind of lush string music, string arrangements with different instruments behind, but the strings kind of take the forefront. Very lush, very relaxing, very exotica type music. And this happens to be a British pressing from EMI Records out of Middlesex. It's got the nice glossy, super glossy cover on here, which makes it really easy to clean off. And it's in really nice shape. Go for a quarter, pick that one up. But that was about it that I saw in the main dollar bin, so I was like, great, you know, there's nothing new. But then I noticed there was a box on the floor of dollar bin stuff. Went through that and found some cool jazz stuff, which is pretty exciting. First up, one that looks pretty beat up, but the record's in better shape than the jacket would indicate. This is Cannonball Adderley Quintet featuring his brother Nat Adderley. Them Dirty Blues on Riverside. Actually, it wouldn't be in horrible shape apart from the kind of clumsy Scotch tape, or I'm not even going to call it Scotch tape, cellophane tape, repair job, early repair job. I think Scotch tape didn't yellow like this. Actual Scotch brand tape, but whatever. Record's in decent shape for its age, a little scuffed up. But I found the early Riverside and the early Prestige, especially the Fireworks label Prestige, Blue Note Prestige, couple other labels play really well. Pacific Jazz, their early pressings do not play that well when they're scuffed up. I think they would use lower quality vinyl or something. Kind of typically been disappointed by the early Pacific Jazz records, but it is what it is. This one plays really well for the condition it looks to be in. Herbie Mann. I'm always finding more Herbie Mann albums. That guy must have recorded 100 albums at least. This is on the Verve label, which I haven't seen before. Herbie Mann plays Afro-Cuban jazz, flautista. Flautista? Flautista? Pretty cool. Another one, I've seen this one before. This one was in pretty nice shape. The Family of Man, the music of Herbie Mann. I believe this is a compilation on Atlantic. And this is I think an early, yeah, it's got the early Atlantic label there. And a red and plum label. And a couple by Les McCann, kind of soulful jazz pianist. First one on Pacific Jazz, this is Les McCann Limited, Plays the Shout, with Leroy Vinegar on bass and Ron Jefferson on drums. This one I think was recorded live. Yeah, recorded at the Bit on the Sunset Strip. And this is one of those early Pacific Jazz label pressings. This one's not too beat up, so it plays really quite well, but when these things get scuffed up, they usually sound pretty rough, and especially the 10-inch records. I found early Pacific Jazz 10-inch records really, I haven't found one that sounds that good, unfortunately. Les McCann Limited, again, live at Shelley's Manhole on Limelight Records. Shelley's Manhole, I guess, was a club run by Shelley Mann, the West Coast jazz drummer. And this is the gatefold here. Pretty cool for a quarter. And a couple more. First up, a Pablo label, Norman Granz's label from the late 70s and 80s. Echoes, the Modern Jazz Quartet of 1984, together again. I guess the band had kind of disbanded, and then at the encouragement of some wealthy Japanese types, gotten together and played some dates in Japan, and then started touring, and then got back in the studio and recorded a few more records. And this is one of them. You can't ever go wrong with the Modern Jazz Quartet in my book. And speaking of Modern Jazz Quartet, their Vibes player is Milt Jackson. This is a compilation on Savoy, the Savoy Sessions, Second Nature. And again, I showed another one in my last video. Must have come from the same collection. It's got water damage on the bottom, and same thing when I went to open the gatefold, it was stuck together and I had to kind of steam it and carefully pry it, so I managed to open it without too much damage to the inside. Again, just tore it a little bit where it was stuck together. Not too bad. And these are his sessions for the Savoy label from 1956. It looks like January 1956. So pretty cool. And again, just like the other one I showed in my last video, these are white label promos in near mint shape. So apart from the jacket being water damaged and a little beat up, really cool to have for 2 records for a quarter. 12.5 cents a piece, white label promos. So that's it. Those are the records from the Arrows Aim 5th anniversary sale. Oh, one more. I forgot about the special find that day from this one's pretty cool. This was actually what I was looking forward to. From the New Arrivals bin, which is always worth going through in the store because he's always getting really cool stuff in. When I found this one, I was really excited. I collect most stuff, pretty much everything by the producer Bill Laswell, anything that he's involved with, producer and bass player. But this one's a really special record. This one from the Word Sound Records sublabel Black Hoods. They put out a series of 10-inch records. Some of them are referred to as Black Hoods dime bags. This was $8, and the reason they call them dime bags is they're packaged like a dime bag of weed, you know, in a little Ziploc, 10-inch Ziploc baggie. They got the Black Hoods logo here, and I'll pull out the record. But this is the Crazy Wisdom Masters, is the name of the musical group on this one. And you probably never heard of Crazy Wisdom Masters, which isn't really the name of the group. The actual musicians on this are the Jungle Brothers. And the story behind this is around 1992, I think it was 92, Jungle Brothers had put out two albums. Their first one, Straight Out of the Jungle, and then they got a record deal with Warner Brothers after that and released Done by the Forces of Nature. Pretty critically well received album, kind of along the lines of De La Soul, things like that. Not really the gangster rap thing that was kind of coming up. But the second record, Done by the Force of Nature, didn't really sell that well. And so they were kind of looking to do something a little different. And around this time, they were hanging out in Brooklyn, where Bill Laswell had his studio. called Greenpoint Studio, and these hip-hop type guys in the area would kind of come and hang out. And I'll actually we'll do a little story time here. I'll read a little bit from a chapter of a book. Found this book online on Amazon and was able to kind of read through one of the chapters of the book that pertains to this album. So the book is called The Greatest Music Never Sold, and this chapter is called The Jungle Brothers, Too Crazy for Hip Hop. So here we go, story time with Mike. At Laswell's Greenpoint Studio, the proprietor was down on the floor playing bass in the middle of a furious jam session that included avant-garde saxman John Zorn, Napalm Death drummer Mick Harris, and members of the British industrial band Godflesh. When Laswell raised his sweaty head, however, he saw 20 local youngsters writing rhymes to accompany the punishing noise. Alongside them were the Jungle Brothers, one of hip-hop's better-known acts, trying to find ways to incorporate their own raps into the racket. Now that was something to see, recalls Laswell, and at that moment I thought, this shit could actually go somewhere, and if it does, it's gonna be a revolution in music. For Laswell, who had spent most of the 80s trying to advance this revolution via every conceivable musical hybrid, this was quite a statement, but it was a feeling reinforced by the rest of the evening. The Jungle Brothers attended Godflesh's gig, quote, and bugged out, according to Laswell. Members of both groups would cement their unlikely bond by scoring weed together in the Bronx during the wee hours. It was this little period where it looked like there was kind of a new world forming, says Laswell, which was an illusion because ultimately it's controlled by business, but it was encouraging. The fate that awaited the most tangible manifestation of this new world, however, was discouraging to say the least. When high school friends Mike G and Africa Baby Bam began recording Crazy Wisdom Masters with Laswell, they were determined to spend the commercial capital they'd accumulated through hits like Jimbrowski and I'll House You to advance hip-hop. What they received for their pains was an official release shorn of nearly every innovation, the eventual loss of their major label deal, and ultimately the disintegration of their partnership. In short, the Jungle Brothers gambled their career on Crazy Wisdom Masters and lost it all. So yeah, what happened is they went into the studio with Laswell, and at the time there were 3 guys in the Jungle Brothers, and one of them after the second album kind of just went his separate way, and they brought in a new guy who'd kind of been hanging around who went by the name of Torture. And really weird, strange fellow, and who was really into some weird music, and kind of the name Torture speaks of his method of rhyming and also his interest in making weird, deconstructed, strange beats. And so they entered the studio with Bill Laswell and they came up with this crazy ass album and presented it to Warner Brothers, who just said hell no and rejected it, and Laswell was kind of out of the deal, and it went to another hip-hop producer who kind of homogenized and watered it down, and eventually it came out as JB's With the Rhythm, something like that. You know, which is just kind of a bland hip-hop album, typical of the times. So a few years later, this guy named Skiz Fernando, who was sort of a journalist and musician himself, he had come to know Bill Laswell, was hanging out in the studio, and with some encouragement and I think some money from Bill Laswell, set up his own record label called Word Sound Records, and once the label was up and running, he actually put out this 10-inch record which has 4 songs from those sessions, from the Crazy Wisdom Masters, the original recordings. So 4 of the best songs with the okay of the Jungle Brothers, and Bill Laswell put these out. And obviously it wasn't released under the name Jungle Brothers because they didn't want to get in trouble, I think, with Warner Brothers, and cause a big stir. So pretty cool stuff. Kind of a glimpse at what could have been. Some really weird experimental hip-hop, way ahead of its time, if you're into like Kool Keith. I can't even think of who else. Just weird, kind of noisy collage of different beats colliding and strange rhymes and samples from weird records. And
my dairy witty, this one that I be. Flexible to flex, you flex and test them, feel them. After the session, you earned it. Wonder why, child. See, there's how we respond when you see the graphic, see the lyric. No matter from the lack, strictly to our speak.
The EZMG forms a new chemistry. For suckers to hear me, so clear me and dear me. A theory of fuck this, it's parallel to flush this, rush this, crush this. Assume we discuss this composition of substance. I built an abundance to show with a vengeance. Slay with a sentence to rid a weak presence. I built an abundance to show with a vengeance. Slay with a sentence to rid a weak presence.
The hell out, Trooper 40 below makes me wanna shout about. Pressure, pressure from all angles makes me demolish, rip and make.
And so I was really excited to find that. And I'm going to stick at the end of this video a part of a documentary that a guy made. It was actually a documentary made about the guy named Torture, who later called himself Sensational, about his kind of bizarre existence, ultimately sort of his downfall, getting involved in alcohol, or mostly drugs, I think. Losing his home, losing most of his musical equipment, recording equipment. But yet his persistence and still recording stuff by teaming up with other musicians. But there's a section about the recording of Crazy Wisdom Masters, which I thought was pretty cool, featuring a little snippet of Bill Laswell talking about the experience. So that's going to be up next on the video. Thanks for watching. Like I said, it's every day is record store day at this shop here in Gainesville. We're really lucky to have it in town, and I'm really happy they've made it 5 years. I wish I had discovered them when they first opened up. I think they were open maybe a year or two before I'd even knew of their existence, and it's a really cool shop. If you're ever in Gainesville, look up Arrow's Aim Records. It's well worth you stopping in. Even if you're in the North Florida area, it's worth a little trip down to check it out. So that's all. I'll see you in the next video, which is probably going to be some cool CDs, some really cool CDs. Thanks for watching. See you all next time. Enjoy this little video outro. Bye.
Sensational joined the group when he must have been about 16. I guess what he's most well known from is his verse on 40 Below Trooper Torture from the Crown Heights area.
Trooper Torture from the Crown Heights area. Lyrical behavior just class. The jam is safe because you got younger brothers spinning on your turntables, thinking about it unstable. You don't know what to do now. I troop your troop. Got brothers area code 1212 chip with my big brother Mike G on the Harlem side of town. Brother up, boogie down, sweet daddy's hit me mean. I'm a place in Brooklyn with after Jack Tripper. Things get ill if you try to break big, get stomped.
That's what he's mostly known for, but he was also on that whole album, Crazy Wisdom Masters, with us.
There's some mixes, some mix downs on it, some producing here and there, drop some lyrics here and there.
He was always responding to different sounds and rhythms and music and words and everything, and he was quite pretty extreme for his age in terms of taste. At that time, I had an apartment on Park Avenue, and I remember I used to give the keys to him and Jungle Brothers and different people from, lack of a better word, rap groups. And I had a huge vinyl collection, and I would stay out all night, and I would come back at 4 or 5 in the morning and Sensational name that time, he was called Torture. So he'd be listening to like Derek Bailey or Anthony Braxton or John Lee Hooker, certainly not to the music that was being sampled by hip-hop people. There was definitely no funkadelic, there was no R&B, there was no 70s funk. It was weird stuff. And that was kind of inspiring that somebody that age was gravitating toward these more experimental sounds. And I believe he had a huge influence on the guys in Jungle Brothers at the time. I don't know if that's a healthy influence in terms of making commercial music or making money, but it was certainly very progressive.
The way he would chop up particular samples and pattern them, you know, like, you know, you hear a pattern and it'd be like boom, boom, bap, but he would go, you know, he would do these crazy patterns.
Making beats that had rhythms in it that people will be like, what the fuck is this shit? Some people call it music and shit.
His ear for sounds and stuff like that is key. That's something I noticed from him early on, and I think he picked up from a little bit of everybody, not just being in the studio with us and what I listened for and what maybe Af listened for, but also like Bill came around the studio and listening to him, you know, all of us were all like, oh, Bill Laswell, whoa, you know, listening to what he did. And, you know, we got the chance to be in the company of like Mudbone Cooper, Bootsy Collins, George Clinton, Bernie Worrell. When it came to sound and the organicness of it, I mean, who better to be in the company of guys like that?
We did an EP and we did then an album, which I think was aggressively rejected by Warner Brothers, because to be honest, it was crazy. And then later on, they were put more in place and made a kind of generic rap record, which I forgot the name of. But it wasn't at all what they were experimenting with, what they were really doing.
When you're at that level, to a certain extent, dealing with a major like Warner Brothers, once it leaves your hands and you give it to them, it's up to them to say if they like it, don't like it, they're gonna release it, they're not gonna release it, whatever.
Hip-hop has always had these moments where it could be to rock music, to rap, to funk, what free jazz is to bebop or to jazz. It's experimental and creative. It's very creative. It can be very creative. It has its points where it's creative. So when you first hear Wu-Tang Clan, when you first hear Kool Keith, or when you first hear Ultramagnetic, you say, okay, this is new, it's something different. And then it always gets homogenized as time goes on. They had that moment themselves. It was not properly documented or acknowledged, but they were there in the forefront of that. They could have made a record with Cecil Taylor. They could have made a record with Ornette Coleman. You know, it was on that level.
Oh, it was all right, but it wasn't crazy. It was the Masters. You know, we tried to make. We made a nice bowl of tomato soup out of some old tomatoes.